So my intestines are twisted together, and it needed to start sorting in one after the other before it would suture the hole. I'm like, wow. My first pregnancy was immediately after I got married, and I wasn't happy because I wasn't ready to be a mom. So my plan was get married, 2 years later have a baby, but here I was pregnant. The first month went by, everything was okay, and then I started spotting I needed to go to the hospital to go and check what the matter was. The doctor told me there was a sac, but there was no fatal heartbeat. And I'm like, okay, so what does that mean? And it's like, I have an abnormal pregnancy, and there was nothing to worry about. It was called a blighted ovum. So a blighted ovum is, there's a sac, but there's no heartbeat. And you have all the pregnancy symptoms. I'm like, so why does that happen? He's like, he can't explain it, but the chromosomes did not fit properly, and so no child was produced. He told me that I would start to bleed, and well, that my body will eject it, and I should be very grateful if that happens. I started bleeding at exactly 3 months, and I needed to go back to the hospital. So the doctor had said that my body would eject it if I'm lucky, and we don't have to do any drastic measures to get the sac and whatever was inside of me out. The procedure was done. It felt like it was very easy, but it was painful. And in my head, I'm like, gosh, people do so many abortions. How do they get it done? After the evacuation, it obviously did not end there. I was bleeding constantly every day. I remember going to the office one day and blood just started gushing out of my body. And my boss is like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, oh, I just lost a baby. He's like, and you're here? I'm like, well, I had to come back to work. Obviously, I had to resign from that job because the way I was bleeding was really, really out of the ordinary. After the experience, I was very skeptical about if I wanted a baby. I wasn't sure I wanted a baby again because I wasn't happy with what I went through. 2 years later, I got pregnant again with my son. I was very afraid to get pregnant, but luckily I got pregnant, and it was a smooth journey until it was time to deliver, and then it was a funny process. I'd gone to the hospital wearing leggings and feeling all posh. And the nurse is like, oh, are you sure you're ready? I'm like, well, I've seen the bloody show. So the bloody show is a red plug nobody tells you about. I wish someone had told me about that red plug. So this thing is like a lever, it just comes out, push, out of you, and you're like, what's this? I asked my mother-in-law because she was in the house at that time, and she says, oh, don't worry, everything is fine. We need to go to hospital as soon as possible. We get to the hospital, the nurse says, oh, are you sure you're ready? I'm like, yes. She's like, no, you're not ready. You can't be ready and be wearing leggings. When people are ready, they remove everything. It progressed, and then it was time to push. I was so sure I wasn't pushing, but the nurse kept on shouting, you're pushing and your water hasn't broken, you can't push, you can't push. I'm like, I'm not even pushing. She's like, you're pushing and you're going to have a tear. So she, in a hurry, does an episiotomy. Gosh, it felt like she used a blunt knife to cut me. So this is not cutting my stomach, obviously cutting the birth canal so that the baby's head can come out. The baby comes out and I'm like, what? This is it? And as I was about getting up from the bed to get onto the wheelchair so I can get back to the ward, I started to throw up. Another experience nobody tells you. I wasn't told to eat before going into delivery. So I was obviously very hungry, and this is me, I still had to breastfeed, and everything just went funny in my body system. I started throwing up, and they said my glucose was low, and then they had to pump glucose into me. So after I had my son, I realized that my tummy wouldn't go down, and I found out that I had something called diastasis recti. So this is a separation of the abdominal walls. Your abdominal walls are supposed to be close together, tight muscles, your core muscles are supposed to be tight together. But a lot of pregnant women with little body frame like mine would experience this kind of thing. I took it for granted and didn't do anything about it. There's a way to heal it. You can do exercises, you can wear girdle and get it back together. But I didn't do anything about it because I had not gained any weight. I still looked the small self that I was. So there was no need doing exercise to further reduce my size. then for my daughter, I waited 5 years to have another child because again, I was scared. My husband had told me there was no way on earth we were going to go through this process again. So just please, let's not do it. But I started to think, do I want to be 40 and then I'm looking for a child? I'm like, let's just do one last one, just one last one. And it's like, TY, we can't do this. I got pregnant with my daughter. Everything seemed smooth. Then I realized that at 1 month, I was already showing, and everyone at work is like, you're pregnant, you're pregnant. I'm like, I'm not pregnant. After I had to use a scarf to cover myself because I felt really embarrassed. Like, I just got in a job, and I was told I couldn't get pregnant 2 years into the job. But obviously, I got pregnant. And my HR is like, you know, this is not part of the policy. I'm like, there's nothing we're going to do about this one. Everybody has morning sicknesses. I had night sickness. So once it's like 7 p.m., I start to just feel very out of my body, and I start to throw up. So in the process of pushing out my son, I had somehow dislocated my abdominal wall, and I wasn't told there was something that could be done at the time. I was supposed to have definitely healed from that completely before getting pregnant again. Well, obviously I got pregnant again, and this belly was long. For my son, they said I had a pendulum pregnancy. I thought that was bad. I had from behind, you wouldn't know I'm pregnant. But once you get in front of me, and you're like, like, who did this to you? Well, so fast forward, my daughter, I was in my 3rd trimester when I felt a bump on my belly. And I was very worried, wondering what it was about. I told the doctor about it, and he says that there's nothing we can do until this baby comes out. My daughter stayed in my belly for 40 weeks. That's 10 months. So people say pregnancy is 9 months. Some pregnancies are 10 months. I carried this girl for 10 months. There was nothing I didn't do from 36 weeks. I went on the treadmill. I walked around the estate. I did everything possible. Took pineapples. They say take pineapples, you would push the baby out. At 36 weeks, my doctor was really skeptical, and he's like, let's do a membrane swipe. A membrane swipe is him putting his finger into me and then trying to swipe the baby to cause a contraction. I'm like, what? So we did that for the first time. He says we're going to do some more. I'm like, there's no way we're doing this. Let this baby come out at our own time. At 38 weeks, he was worried again. He's like, this thing is taking too long and you're always very tired. I was always very tired. But I was like, I don't think I can do this membrane swap thing anymore. Let's just keep this baby in. So he says that if by 39 weeks the baby is not out, he's going to induce me. I went for antenatal at 30, like almost 40 weeks. And then he gives me a tablet and says, oh, in 5 hours, this baby would come out. In 1 hour, I started to feel very funny and uncomfortable. I told the nurse, I want to wee. She's like, no, wee in your bed. There's no getting up to go and wee anywhere because anything can happen anytime soon. I managed to get out of the bed. As I stood, there was water everywhere. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I think I just messed up. And she's like, you're speaking English. There's nothing to worry about. We'll clean up. That your baby is almost here. You need to get ready. I'm like, I think she's here already. Like the head, I can feel the head. She's like, no, it's not possible. I called my husband. I think baby's here. So you need to get here. I don't know if you flew. I just felt someone's hand on my back and like, Tiwa, just relax. You're going to be fine. In 1 hour, my daughter was out. And I'm like, wow. A month after I had my daughter, not even a month, obviously I had postpartum depression, a very mild one. All I did was cry. I didn't want to touch my child because I just didn't understand why I put myself through that process of sleepless nights, being hungry, and disturbing my entire world with another child. You know, it was so bad that I couldn't hold my own child. It got me worried. My husband would have to give me my child to breastfeed. Once I breastfeed, I give the child back to him to bop because I didn't want to have anything to do with that child. I just felt like I'd put myself on an unnecessary journey. A month later, I started to feel very uncomfortable once I ate my food. I'd feel my food moving inside my stomach. And then after a while, I couldn't use the toilet. I went to the hospital and the doctor says, let's do a scan just to be sure what this thing is about. We did the scan and he realized that there was a hole on my stomach wall. And he says, oh, no big deal. It's epigastric hernia. We would repair it. Come to the hospital. It's 1 hour 2 hours, you're done and you can go back home. Okay. So this was as a result of the diastasis rectal that wasn't taken care of. He had further ruptured my omentus. Omentus is something that connects your organ in your belly. So there was a hole in it, and my small intestine, or large, I don't know what intestine, was sticking out on the side. So that was the bump that was on the bump. And I'm like, okay. It's like, there's nothing to worry about. 1 hour surgery, you're going to working and go back home. Okay, let's get this done. We get into the surgery. He realizes that there's more to just the intestine that is sticking out. So my intestines are twisted together, and he needed to start sorting it one after the other before it would suture the hole. I'm like, wow. So all of this is going on, and I'm watching because I was only given a local anesthesia. He didn't want me to fall asleep. There was no screen. Like you watch Grey's Anatomy, there's proper screen. You can't see what's happening. But this one, I was watching the doctor sort my intestine one by one and putting everything back and start to sew again. 1 hour becomes 5 hours. Every time the surgeon is trying to sew, I don't know what was happening to the stitches. It was always breaking. We finally get it done and I pass out, because obviously I'd been in that state for longer than expected. The healing process was longer than usual. I kept on bleeding from the upsides and nothing could be done about it. I'll bring my faith to this because I'd gotten a promise from God, and he says I would heal you of all your diseases. And I'm like, what disease am I going to have again? I wasn't sure what that was. And immediately I saw that this thing wasn't healing, I started to confess the word. And I'm like, God, this is what this is. This is what's happening to me, and I need you to do something about it. In my church, we say something that the word works. And in the space of 2 weeks, my upside dried up by itself. And I'm like, okay, this God seems like he's really real.